He was just a human, until the princess declared him her own. They were a new species, young and small compared to the towering Arvans, the winged Selari, or the crystal-skinned Illyrians. Most species treated humans politely if they noticed them at all. Elias, a human cultural liaison, often joked to himself that he was just a speck in the galaxy, a background figure in the grand interstellar theater. Yet here he was, standing in the marble halls of Aurelian Prime, a world famous for its sparkling towers and endless sky bridges, about to witness history, or more accurately, to be almost entirely ignored by it. The summit hall was enormous, more like a cathedral than a conference room. Light shimmered from tall, crystalline windows, scattering rainbows across the polished floors. Delegates from dozens of empires had gathered, each species' pride visible in their elaborate ceremonial garb. Elias felt small. He had been instructed to observe, take notes, and ensure that human customs were respected. Nothing more, nothing daring. He quietly stepped to a corner near a balcony that overlooked the central courtyard. Below, Aurelian citizens and visitors moved like a living mosaic, their colored robes and wings creating a kaleidoscope. Elias tried to memorize everything: the architecture, the sounds, the faint smell of ozone that lingered near the crystalline structures. He reminded himself, "You are here to watch, not to act." But even as he said it, he felt an odd flutter of anticipation. Humans may have been insignificant in the galaxy, but they had a way of noticing things that others overlooked. Elias Mar, a soft, melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned and froze. Standing before him was Princess Valith herself, her violet eyes glinting like distant stars. Her presence was commanding, yet gentle. She wore robes that shimmered in shifting colors, threads woven with microscopic crystals that caught the light. Elias swallowed. He had read reports and seen holograms of her before, but nothing prepared him for the weight of her presence. "You are far from your species' capital," she said, her tone polite but curious. "Do you find Aurelian welcoming?" Elias bowed slightly. "It is overwhelming. But beautiful. Your world is unlike any I have seen." She smiled faintly, a gesture that somehow seemed more dangerous than anger. "It is not often that humans attend such summits. Tell me, Elias Mar, what do you think of our customs?" He hesitated. Normally, he would have replied with a diplomatic, neutral statement, but something in her gaze made him answer honestly. "They are precise, thoughtful, and sometimes confusing, but I notice the care behind them. Every detail matters. That tells me that your people respect each other and the traditions you uphold." Princess Valith studied him quietly, and Elias felt the heat rising in his face. Other delegates had already begun whispering among themselves, curious about this human who dared to speak plainly. The room hummed with tension, and for the first time, Elias realized that he might be more than a background observer today. Just then, a commotion erupted near the center of the hall. A group of Selari delegates had misinterpreted an Aurelian greeting ritual, bowing incorrectly and stepping on ceremonial stones in the wrong order. The elders gasped, and whispers of disapproval echoed through the hall. The situation was escalating quickly. A public embarrassment could have sparked resentment or even insulted centuries of tradition. Without thinking, Elias stepped forward. "Please," he said, raising a hand, "you are doing your best. The stones are in the wrong pattern, yes, but the intent is clear. Allow me to guide you gently so that your gesture aligns with their tradition." Eyes turned toward him, and for a moment the room went silent. A human, small and unassuming, offering guidance in a centuries-old ceremony. It was unheard of. Princess Valith's eyes widened slightly. Elias gestured carefully, directing the Selari delegates with calm instructions. His words were simple, his movements deliberate, and his tone respectful. Slowly, the ceremony resumed. The mistakes were corrected, but without shame. The elders murmured approval. Some of the older delegates shook their heads in disbelief, but no one interrupted Elias. When it was over, Princess Valith inclined her head toward him. "You have an unusual gift," she said softly. "Not strength, not wealth, but understanding. You notice what others do not." Elias felt his cheeks heat. He wanted to bow again, to tell her that he was nothing more than a human trying not to mess things up, but instead he only nodded. "I try." The princess smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed to linger longer than it should. "I will watch your efforts closely." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of discussions and formal speeches. Elias mostly stayed at the edges, quietly observing, making notes in a small data pad. Yet he could feel the subtle shifts in attention. Delegates who had ignored him before now glanced his way, curious. Some even whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that suggested, "Who is this human, and why does he act with such calm?" During a break, Elias found himself walking through a balcony overlooking the garden. The air was fragrant with luminescent flora that glowed softly under the planet's twin suns. Princess Valith approached him again, her steps quiet. "You see things differently than my people," she said, almost to herself. "Different perspectives are rare in a place where tradition outweighs reason." Elias looked out over the garden. "Humans are used to small perspectives," he said. "We don't have centuries of history in space. We notice things because we must, or we will lose them." She turned toward him, her eyes sharp. "And what do you notice here?" He hesitated, thinking carefully. "That respect is given more than it is earned. That pride can hide kindness. And that even in the smallest gesture, you reveal who you truly are." Princess Valith studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are unlike any human I expected. Perhaps that is fortunate." Elias felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. In a place where one misstep could ruin reputations, he had simply been himself. And the princess had noticed. Later, during a formal luncheon, Elias was seated at a small table at the corner, as per human protocol. The galaxy's most powerful species surrounded him in a sea of color and sound. He could feel their judgment, some curious, some dismissive. Yet every so often, a glance from Princess Valith reminded him that he was not invisible. The lunch proceeded with careful etiquette. Aliens discussed politics, trade, and the subtle games of influence. Elias listened, asked questions when necessary, and occasionally offered neutral observations that made even the most cynical delegates pause. Humans were expected to be polite, but not influential. Yet his calm presence, his patience, and his willingness to understand rather than dominate subtly shifted the room's energy. By the end of the day, the summit had progressed without incident, a rare achievement. Many delegates credited their own caution, others their intelligence. Few acknowledged Elias, but the princess did, in a quiet way that only he could notice. As the sun set over Aurelian Prime, painting the crystalline towers in shades of gold and violet, Elias walked back to his quarters, exhausted but exhilarated. He had done nothing extraordinary, at least, nothing he thought mattered. And yet, for the first time in his life, he felt that perhaps humans could matter in this vast, indifferent galaxy. Outside, Princess Valith's silhouette appeared against the glowing skyline. She did not speak immediately, only watched him with eyes that seemed to see beyond rank, species, or protocol. Then softly she said, "Elias Mar, you may yet surprise us all." Elias swallowed, unsure how to respond. He had survived the first day, not by power or wealth, but by simply noticing, listening, and understanding. And somehow that had caught the attention of a princess, someone whose influence stretched across light years and civilizations. As night fell over the palace, Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his quarters. He thought of the summit, of the mistakes he had quietly corrected, of the small ripple of change a human could make in a galaxy that had written them off. Somewhere he knew this was only the beginning. And in the quiet corners of the palace, Princess Valith also lay awake, her thoughts circling the human who had entered her court quietly, unnoticed by all but her, and yet left a mark impossible to ignore. Elia's Mar woke to the soft glow of Aurelian Prime's twin suns rising over the crystalline towers. The palace was quieter than the day before, a calm that only deepened his sense of unease. Yesterday had been strange enough. He had thought he was just a human, here to observe and note, and yet somehow he had managed to catch the attention of Princess Valeth. Now he realized, attention could be dangerous. Even a small ripple in the wrong place could upset centuries of interstellar politics. He dressed in the simple human tunic he had been provided and stepped into the hall, careful not to draw too much notice. The air was already filled with the soft hum of distant conversations as delegates and attendants prepared for another day of formal meetings. Yet, for some reason, all eyes seemed to find him as he walked toward the main hall. Not in mockery, not in derision, but curiosity. The human had survived the first day, had quietly helped avoid embarrassment, and that alone had made him someone worth watching. Princess Valeth appeared at the end of the corridor as if sensing his thoughts. She moved with the ease of someone who had lived her whole life in command, but her steps carried a lightness Elias could not ignore. "Good morning, Elias," she said, her voice gentle but carrying the weight of authority. "I trust the first day was enlightening." Elias bowed slightly. "It was. I learned much about your people and much about myself." She raised an eyebrow, a gesture that held both amusement and curiosity. "And what is it you learned about yourself?" He hesitated. He had been thinking about this for hours, about the way humans seemed insignificant in the galaxy, about the way they were often overlooked, and about the strange thrill of being noticed by someone like her. "That even a human can matter in ways larger than size or power," he said quietly. "Sometimes understanding is more important than strength. Sometimes patience is more powerful than command." She studied him silently for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly, a smile that seemed to hold secrets he could not yet understand. "Your perspective is unusual. It may serve you and others well." The morning sessions were filled with debates and discussions that stretched on endlessly. Delegates argued about trade agreements, planetary rights, and historical disputes. It was the sort of diplomacy that could tire even the most patient being. Yet Elias noticed things that others missed. The subtle shifts in tone, the hidden meanings behind carefully chosen words, the tiny gestures that betrayed true intentions. At one point, a dispute arose over the distribution of rare minerals from a newly discovered asteroid field. Several species wanted more than their share, and the debate quickly became heated. Elias observed quietly, noting the tension in the room. He realized that the arguments were not only about resources, they were about status, pride, and influence. Princess Valeth watched him closely as if weighing his reactions. Finally, she spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Elias, what is your perspective on this matter?" The hall went silent. All eyes turned toward him, and Elias felt the weight of their scrutiny. He took a deep breath, recalling the lessons humans had learned over centuries. Observe, understand, then act with clarity. "The asteroid field is new," he said. "Every species seeks advantage, but perhaps we should consider the long-term effect. If one group takes more than its share, future conflicts may arise. Cooperation may be slow at first, but it ensures stability and trust. If we act with fairness now, every species benefits in the long run." Murmurs ran through the hall. Some delegates frowned, others nodded, but all were surprised that a human would speak so plainly, so thoughtfully. Princess Valeth's eyes glimmered. "You see the larger picture," she said. "Not just gain, but consequence. That is rare." The day progressed, and with every discussion, Elias found himself becoming more than an observer. He mediated subtle disagreements, suggested compromises that no one else had considered, and reminded delegates of the importance of respect and honor. Each time the room paused, listened, and sometimes even adjusted their position. It was during a late afternoon assembly that the situation escalated. Several powerful delegates began pressing the princess regarding the upcoming succession ceremony, a tradition that would determine the future of the Aurelian Empire. They hoped to pressure her into decisions favorable to their empires, using threats veiled in politeness and custom. Elias watched, tense. If the princess made a wrong move, it could spark resentment or political instability. Her calm presence was not enough to stop them. She needed strategy, guidance, or perhaps a quiet display of human courage. As a particularly sharp accusation was aimed at the princess, Elias stepped forward instinctively. "Princess Vaelith," he said, his voice steady, "you are under no obligation to act against your principles. These customs are meant to guide, not to control. Perhaps a reminder of the original purpose of this tradition would clarify the path." Gasps echoed through the hall. A human had spoken to a princess, and not in a deferential whisper but with quiet authority. Princess Vaelith did not flinch. Instead, she studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slightly. "Elias," she said, "it seems your insight is needed once again." He provided a brief explanation, drawing from historical examples, cultural logic, and human reasoning. Slowly, the room adjusted. The delegates shifted their tone, and the pressure on the princess eased. A sense of balance returned. Afterward, in the private chambers, Princess Vaelith looked at him with a mixture of admiration and something else, something Elias could not yet name. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she said softly. "Not powerful, not wealthy, yet you carry weight. How do you do this?" Elias shrugged, feeling awkward. "I simply try to understand. Humans have survived by noticing details others overlook, by listening, by weighing consequences. That is all I do here." She studied him in silence, then moved closer, her voice lowering. "I see more than you know. In this galaxy, few see clearly. You do." For a moment, Elias felt a strange connection, as if the vast distance between their worlds had shrunk. But the moment was broken as a messenger arrived, whispering urgent news about tensions in another hall. The princess nodded, composed once again, and Elias followed her, aware that the summit was far from over. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the princess made a bold and unexpected move. The assembly was convened to formally discuss planetary alliances, and the room was filled with delegates, diplomats, and officials from dozens of worlds. The air was thick with expectation, politeness masking the underlying tension of power and influence. Princess Vaelith stood at the center, her robes shimmering in the light. She spoke calmly at first, addressing the matters of the summit. But then she paused, and all eyes turned toward Elias. The human had not expected this. He had no role in the official discussions. Yet every gaze now seemed fixed upon him. "In all my years," the princess said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I have never encountered a being who has demonstrated such clarity, patience, and understanding." Her eyes met Elias's. A human who listens, who considers, who acts with integrity rather than ambition. Such qualities are rare, precious, and necessary for the future of this empire and this galaxy. A murmur ran through the hall. Delegates exchanged glances. Some were shocked, others skeptical, but no one interrupted. Then she spoke words that made the room fall completely silent. "I hereby declare Elias Mar under my protection and claim. He is not a subject, not a tool, but a companion in understanding, a guide in reason, and a human who shall stand beside me in matters of consequence. Let it be known across all worlds that the Princess of Aurelian has chosen him as her own." Gasps of disbelief filled the hall. Delegates whispered furiously, some outraged, others bewildered. A human declared by a princess as her own was unprecedented. It was a political statement, a personal declaration, and an act of courage all at once. Elias froze. He had not expected this. He had not come here seeking recognition, let alone such a public and profound connection. Yet as he looked into Princess Valeth's eyes, he understood. This was not a whim. She had chosen him because of what he represented, not as a human to wield power, but as a human who reminded her of balance, fairness, and clarity in a galaxy too often clouded by pride and ambition. Slowly he bowed, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. "I accept your declaration, Princess Valeth, not for power, not for glory, but with gratitude and humility. I will do my best to honor the trust you place in me." The princess inclined her head, satisfied. "That is all I ask, Elias. Let the galaxy witness that true strength lies not in conquest, but in understanding, patience, and integrity." The summit ended shortly after, with delegates left to ponder the meaning of her declaration. Some whispered that it was a calculated political move, others that it was a bold challenge to tradition, but all agreed that something had changed. The human was no longer just a human. He had become a figure whose presence could not be ignored, whose perspective could not be dismissed. That night, Elias walked through the quiet palace gardens, reflecting on the day's events. The stars above Aurelian Prime seemed brighter, somehow closer. He realized that his life had shifted in a single moment, that a simple human, one who had always believed himself unimportant, now held a place in the galaxy's history simply by being true to his values and courageous enough to act. And somewhere in the palace, Princess Valeth watched him, knowing that the choice she had made would ripple across the stars, not as a claim of ownership, but as recognition of the quiet, enduring power of humanity itself. For Elias Mar, the path ahead was uncertain. He would face challenges, scrutiny, and expectations far beyond what he had imagined. Yet he felt a strange sense of purpose, a confidence born from the simple truth that being human, listening, understanding, and acting with integrity, was enough to shape worlds. And for the first time, he understood that he was no longer just a human. He was someone whose presence mattered. The next morning, Elias Mar awoke with a strange mix of nervousness and purpose. The events of the previous day still swirled in his mind. He had been publicly declared by Princess Valeth an act no human, or perhaps no being at all, had ever experienced in the galactic concord. The weight of that recognition pressed upon him, but instead of fear, it brought a sense of responsibility he had never felt before. Humans were new to the galaxy, often dismissed as weak or irrelevant, yet somehow he had become a symbol of integrity and insight. He dressed carefully, choosing simple but neat clothing, and walked through the palace corridors. The halls were alive with the low hum of activity. Delegates from various empires whispered as he passed, eyes following him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some whispered rumors, questioning why a human had earned such favor. Others simply observed, unsure of how to react. Elias felt a quiet determination. He had no desire for power or glory. He only wanted to do what was right and perhaps to prove that humans could contribute something meaningful to the galaxy. Princess Valeth awaited him in a sunlit garden. She was already walking among the glowing flora, her robes catching the light as they shimmered in a shifting pattern of violet and gold. "Good morning, Elias," she said. "Today, the discussions will become more complex. Are you prepared?" Elias nodded, though he felt the tension in his chest. "I will do my best, Princess." "Your best is more than enough," she replied, her gaze thoughtful. "Many who are older and wiser than you fail to act with clarity. That is why I trust you." The first meeting of the day focused on a dispute between two minor systems over mining rights. Normally, such discussions were resolved with harsh negotiations, threats, or concessions that favored the stronger party. Elias listened carefully, noting not only the words spoken but the unspoken pressures, the subtle signs of fear and pride that influenced every motion. When it was his turn to speak, he chose his words carefully. "Both systems have valid claims," he said. If one takes more than is fair, conflict may arise later. Perhaps a shared agreement with oversight and cooperation could provide a solution that benefits both. This way, trust is built, not destroyed. The room went silent. Then slowly, the leaders began to nod, some reluctantly, some thoughtfully. Elias could feel the shift. The concept was simple, human, and practical, yet it was foreign to many of the delegates who had been trained to see compromise as weakness. Princess Valith's eyes glimmered with approval, though her face remained calm. As the morning progressed, Elias became increasingly aware of the subtle influence he held. The other delegates watched him carefully, listening to his reasoning, often reconsidering their own positions based on what he said. He had expected to be ignored or dismissed. Instead, he was shaping decisions without even seeking attention. During a short break, Elias wandered into a quieter section of the palace where he could think. Princess Valith found him there, sitting on a stone bench beneath softly glowing trees. She joined him without a word, and for a few minutes they simply observed the garden in silence. "You are different from what I expected," she said at last. "I thought humans were small, insignificant, untrained in the ways of galactic politics. Yet you act with wisdom I have rarely seen." Elias shrugged, feeling embarrassed. "I am still human," he said. "I make mistakes. I do not know all the rules, all the histories, but humans survive by learning, by observing, by listening. That is what I do here." The princess smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is why I chose you. Not for power, not for influence, but for perspective. Many leaders forget that the galaxy is larger than their own ambition. You remember it." As afternoon approached, a new challenge emerged. News arrived that a powerful merchant consortium from a distant sector was attempting to manipulate smaller worlds to their advantage. The issue had grown beyond a simple dispute. It threatened to destabilize trade routes, affecting dozens of systems. Elias was called to the council chamber. The other delegates had already begun heated arguments, voices raised, fingers pointing, wings flaring. Elias observed quietly, noting the underlying motives. The consortium wanted control, the smaller worlds wanted protection, and many delegates were unsure how to proceed without causing harm to their own alliances. He stepped forward. "The goal should not be to dominate," he said calmly, "nor should it be to retaliate. The goal should be stability. Each world has value, and every decision affects more than just the parties directly involved. Perhaps a cooperative approach, with shared benefits and safeguards for the weaker systems, could prevent conflict and ensure long-term prosperity." A murmur went through the room. Some delegates frowned, believing his approach too naive. Others, weary of constant conflict, listened with interest. Princess Valith's gaze was steady, encouraging. He continued, explaining with simple logic how agreements could be structured, how fairness could be maintained, and how trust could be built between disparate systems. Each point he made was rooted in human experience, how small communities on Earth had survived by cooperation rather than conquest. Slowly, the room began to quiet, delegates reconsidering their positions. By the time the meeting ended, a framework for cooperation had been established. It was not perfect, but it was a start, and it had been achieved without threats or force. Delegates left the chamber still murmuring, some impressed, some skeptical, but all aware that a human had influenced the outcome. Later, Elias found himself walking with Princess Valith through a corridor lined with murals depicting the history of Aurelian Prime. "You see," she said, "the galaxy does not respond to might alone. It responds to understanding, to patience, to insight. You remind them of this forcibly, yet without aggression." Elias shook his head. "I do not feel forceful. I only speak what I think is fair." "It is others who notice the difference." She smiled faintly. "That difference is important. That difference is power of a sort many have forgotten. And now, because of you, the galaxy may begin to notice humans as more than observers." That evening, as the palace settled into quiet, Elias was invited to a private audience with the princess. They sat together in a room with a view of the city below, towers glinting in the starlight. The air was calm, almost intimate, a contrast to the political storm that had raged all day. "I have been considering your role," she said softly. "Not just here, but in the larger galaxy. Your perspective, your patience, your insight, they are needed far more than you realize. And yet you are human. You may not seek power, yet others may try to manipulate your position. You must be prepared." Elias nodded slowly. "I understand. I have not sought recognition and I do not seek control. I only wish to act with integrity to help when I can. That is all I ask." Princess Valeth's eyes softened. "Then that is what you shall do. But remember, the galaxy will watch. Some will respect you, some will doubt you, and some will resent the fact that a human has been recognized in ways they cannot imagine. You must remain steady." Elias felt a surge of determination. He had spent much of his life feeling small, overlooked, and insignificant. Now he had a purpose, a place where his actions mattered, where his voice could be heard. He realized that he had never truly been powerless. Humans survived not by brute force, not by domination, but by understanding, learning, and adapting. Those qualities, unnoticed by many, were precisely what the galaxy needed. Over the following days, Elias continued to participate in the summit, slowly becoming more involved in negotiations, mediations, and discussions. Delegates began to approach him not as a human outsider, but as a valued contributor. Some were wary, some skeptical, but none could ignore the quiet influence he wielded. Princess Valeth's support remained steadfast, a constant reminder that his role was recognized and important. One evening, after a particularly long day, Elias walked through the palace gardens alone. The twin moons had risen, casting silver light over the crystalline flora. He paused near a softly glowing tree, reflecting on everything that had happened. Humans were young in the galaxy, fragile in some ways, yet capable of surprising resilience. They could adapt, endure, and influence in ways that others overlooked. Princess Valeth appeared beside him, silent at first. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked softly. Elias shook his head. "I have done nothing extraordinary. I have only acted with honesty, patience, and understanding. That is all humans do when they survive." She smiled, the light catching her eyes. "Extraordinary is not always measured in strength or conquest. Sometimes it is measured in clarity, in the courage to act rightly when the world expects you to remain invisible. You have done that, and now the galaxy will never see humans the same way again." Elias felt a quiet pride. He had not sought recognition, but he had earned it through simple humanity. And as he walked back toward the palace with Princess Valeth, he realized that the path ahead would be challenging, filled with scrutiny and expectation, yet it was also full of opportunity. He was no longer just a human observer. He was someone who could make a difference, someone who could remind the galaxy that patience, understanding, and integrity were forces far more powerful than many realized. And somewhere far above the palace, the stars of Aurelian Prime shone down as if witnessing the quiet rise of a human who might one day reshape the galaxy. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with thought, insight, and the enduring power of humanity. Elias woke before dawn, the palace still holding its cool silence. The events of the summit had become a steady rhythm in his life. Meetings, quiet conversations, the soft weight of expectations. He had learned much about protocol, about patience, and about how a single steady voice could calm a room. Yet he knew the hardest part had not been the debates or the compromises. The hardest part was living in the light that followed Princess Valeth's declaration. Everyone watched now. Every word he spoke would be measured. Every mistake would be magnified. He dressed slowly, choosing clothes that were simple but neat. Simplicity had always been a human strength. People from Earth learned to value the small things because small things often mattered most. Elias thought of that as he walked to the central hall. The grand windows let in a pale gold light that made the crystals in the walls glow like distant stars. Delegates from a dozen worlds had gathered again, some returning, some new. The air buzzed with conversation, but beneath it was a new undercurrent, curiosity about the human who had been named by a princess. Princess Valith met him at the hall entrance. She had not slept much, Elias guessed. There were faint lines of worry at the corners of her eyes. Yet when she smiled at him, it was warm and sure. "Today we begin implementing some of the agreements you helped shape," she said. "There will be resistance. Be ready." Elias nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. Resistance was expected. Old habits were stubborn. Pride made compromise seem like surrender to some. He had seen that in the summit debates. But he had also seen that long-term thinking could change minds when it was presented with clarity and fairness. That was the path he would follow. The first discussion concerned a remote cluster of worlds that had been left largely ungoverned for generations. Merchants had moved in, building stations, making deals, and leaving systems with little protection. The smaller worlds had suffered quietly, their resources drained. Many delegations wanted to strip the merchants of their rights immediately. Others warned that heavy-handed action could start a cascade of violence across trade routes. Elias listened. He remembered stories from Earth about towns that had been saved by neighbors who trusted one another. He spoke in a calm voice. "Punishment may feel right, but it may also create new enemies," he said. "If we create a system where merchants must share benefits and protect local worlds, we protect trade and protect the small systems. If enforcement is fair and transparent, trust grows and both sides win." The hall murmured. Some delegates accepted the logic. A few resisted. But Princess Valith supported his suggestion, offering a plan for oversight councils that included representatives from merchant groups and the affected worlds. It was not perfect, but it was a start, better than immediate punishment or reckless force. Slowly, the delegates agreed to a framework that favored cooperation over dominance. Word of the decision spread beyond the summit. Smaller worlds reported hope. Merchants grumbled but agreed to talks. The galaxy noticed a pattern. Human ideas often reached solutions that avoided bloodshed and still produced results. That mattered. For centuries, other species had measured strength by the ability to conquer. Elias and the princess showed that strength could also be measured by the ability to preserve peace and build systems that lasted. Not all reactions were positive. A faction of old-line diplomats frowned at the changing winds. They argued that humans were naive, that their desire for connection masked dangerous softness. Some political rivals tried to use Elias as a wedge, whispering that the princess had given away her judgment to a newcomer. There were minor scandals, old bills dug up, misunderstandings magnified, things that required careful handling. Elias learned quickly to be honest and clear. When accusations surfaced, he answered them plainly. Honesty, he found, cleaned up more trouble than any clever evasion. One evening, a tense delegation arrived from a frontier system where a local governor had tried to enforce taxes without fair notice. The governor claimed the taxes were legal. The traders said they were being robbed. Voices rose. Cultural insults were exchanged. The old ways, threaten, back away, threaten again, would have taken hold. Elias watched and felt his chest tighten. He remembered the faces of the small worlds in the merchant dispute, the tired eyes of farmers in a distant valley who had no planet to protect them. He stepped forward. "Tell me what you need," he said simply. "Tell me what you want to keep and what you fear losing." At first, the governor and the traders glared at him. Then slowly they spoke. The governor wanted the infrastructure the taxes promised. The traders wanted clear rules and fair compensation when rules changed. Elias helped frame a solution, a phased tax program with protections for traders and a fund for infrastructure that the merchants could help manage. He suggested a council of equal representatives, governor, traders, and local communities, so oversight would be fair. The agreement took time. It required patience, small concessions, and trust, but it worked. The traders left less angry. The governor had a structured plan. The council promised to meet monthly and to be transparent. Elias felt tired but satisfied. He had not used force. He had used listening and reason. The agreement would stand only if the people kept faith, but it had a chance, because the solution respected both needs and created a path for both sides to benefit. As the summit drew to a close, news came of a more delicate matter. A group of species had begun to trade a rare cultural artifact, one that held deep spiritual meaning for a small people. The artifact's trade was legal under current laws, but many argued that laws should protect such things from commerce, that some items should not be sold. The debate split opinion along cultural lines. Elias recognized that laws alone could not answer such questions. He proposed a different approach, a shared cultural registry run by a consortium of cultures. Items of spiritual importance could be registered, and their trade would require consent and shared benefit, including cultural exchanges that honored the source communities. He suggested that if an artifact were used for public display or study, the originating culture be invited to share its meaning, to teach others rather than be reduced to a commodity. His proposal resonated with many delegates on a human level. People everywhere felt the weight of their heritage. The plan that emerged preserved trade but added respect. It required education and a willingness to listen. Many delegates called it a victory for empathy. Princess Valith watched Elias through it all, her expression unreadable at times, then proud at others. She had not chosen him for ease. She had chosen him because she believed a human perspective would remind the galaxy of its better self. Her choice had been a risk, one that required courage. Now, as the summit wrapped its final sessions, Elias felt the truth of her wisdom. The final ceremony was quiet and solemn, a fitting end to weeks of talks. Delegates gave final statements, many expressing cautious optimism. The agreements were not perfect, but they reflected compromise, thought, and respect. When it came time for the closing remarks, Princess Valith stepped forward and spoke with calm authority. She thanked the delegates and honored their traditions. Then, in a voice that reached every corner of the hall, she turned to Elias. "You stood beside me," she said, "not because I asked for convenience, but because I chose someone who reminds me, and all of us, what it means to think beyond power. Elias Mar is not mine to command. He is mine to honor as a partner in reason. Let this not be a claim of ownership, but a recognition of his place. The galaxy will be better if it remembers that small voices can carry truth." Her words brought whispers and then a steady, respectful silence. Elias felt warmth in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He had no desire for adulation. He wanted people to listen, to think, to act with care. The princess's words had given him a platform, and he would use it with humility. As delegates departed, many sought Elias out. Some thanked him, others questioned him. He answered each politely, listening as he always did. The Aurelian courts offered him an official role as an advisor to the princess, a position that would tie him to the empire in ways he had not imagined. He accepted, not from ambition, but from a sense of duty. He would not be the ruler of worlds, but he could help keep them from tearing themselves apart. When the palace grew quiet, Princess Valith and Elias walked the balconies together. The city below glittered like a field of starlight. "You have changed more than agreements," she said softly. "You have reminded my people, reminded me, of what balance looks like." Elias smiled faintly. "You chose me because you saw something in a human that your people needed," he said. "You respected me before the galaxy did. I only tried to repay that trust." She looked at him, her violet eyes sincere. "You did more than that. You showed that humanity's strength is not in weapons or fleets. It is in the very ordinary things you call listening, honesty, and patience. Those things matter more than many believe. Elias felt a quiet joy. He thought of home, of small lights in the dark, of people sharing simple meals, of laughter that crossed language. He realized that all his life had been preparation for this, to be human not in the shadow of great powers, but as a force of steady good. The night before his return to Earth, he stood at a small gathering where delegates and palace staff came to offer thanks and gifts. Some brought small art, some offered songs, others presented food from their worlds. Elias accepted each with humility, delighted by the human instinct to share. He shared stories of Earth in return, stories of simple courage, of communities that rebuilt after storms, of music that made people stand together. The room listened, enchanted. Human stories, small and true, touched others in ways treaties could not. When it was time to leave Aurelian Prime, Elias stepped onto the transport that would take him to his ship. Princess Valith stood before him, their farewell quiet and meaningful. "Go home, Elias Mar," she said. "Teach your people what you have learned here. Let them know that the galaxy watches and that they can be more than they were told." He bowed, grateful. "I will, Princess. I will tell them not to seek glory but to seek understanding. That will change more than power ever could." The transport lifted, leaving the glittering towers behind. Elias watched Aurelian Prime shrink into a field of light and then stars. He felt small in the vastness, but he also felt anchored. He had been just a human, until the princess declared him her own. Now he was more, a human who had reminded a galaxy of a simple truth. People mattered not because of might, but because of the quiet choices they made every day. As the stars passed by, Elias opened a small data pad and began writing. He wrote about fairness, about listening, about the power of small acts. He wrote about Princess Valith's courage and the slow work of building trust. He knew his words might not change everything. But seeds grow slowly, and sometimes a single seed can change a field. He was just a human, until the princess declared him her own.